Evening, spacers, drifters, and free folk, and them what got no love for bureaucracy. This here's Jim Jericho, your friendly voice from the black, coming at you with a half illegal and full volume of the Periphery Telecom Entertainment Group, the only network that don't give a damn what Comstar says you can or cannot think. Now, tonight's broadcast, this one's a live wire. So if you're tuning in from some old league relay, or if your ship's got that Comstar uplink, you might want to switch that to analog there, sugar. Cause we're talking about the one name that'll get your HPG access revoked faster than a pirate jump. The man they called the Usurper. That's right, Stefan Amaris. Now I can hear y'all already. Jim, ain't that the lunatic that strangled the Star League and got half the rim torched for it? That's what they tell you. That's what the winners say. But here's the problem with history, folks. It's just propaganda with better grammar. See, the story of Stefan Amaris ain't a tale of tyranny. It's a story of a man who saw the League for what it had become. A rotten empire so soft of hands and gritty of hearts, and tried to save it before it collapsed under its own damn weight. They called him a monster. But what if he was a visionary? What if he was the only one fighting for the dream the Camerons started? A dream of unity, a dream of humanity not divided by 5 bloated houses, and 1,000 politicians riding on the corpses of better men. We're going back before the coup, before the fires of Terra, before Kerensky turned conqueror. We're winding the jump clock all the way back to the start, to where the Camerons and the Amarises first shook hands. 2 names, 2 dynasties. One built the throne, one kept the frontier alive. And somewhere in them, buried under the centuries of blood, lies the truth about why the Star League really fell. So strap in, spacers. Tonight on Outworld Frequency 9, we're telling the story they banned in the Inner Sphere. The story of a friendship turned legend, a betrayal turned myth, and a man's history been too scared to forgive. This is the Usurper's truth, the life and legacy of Stefan Amaris. And it all starts, as all tragedies do, with good intentions and a handshake. Now listen here, spacers. This is where the story begins. We're going back to the mid-25th century, before the Star League, before the Inner Sphere was a mess of squabbling houses and lost promises. Picture Terra, shiny as a polished hull in high orbit. Marble halls, steel towers, the works. And there, strutting through it all, was Jacob Cameron, Director General of the Terran Hegemony, a man with the vision bigger than his pay grade, thinking he could tame human nature itself with machines. Yeah, I said it, machines. Battle mechs, y'all. He figured if you could build a big enough iron horse, folks would stop fighting each other. Noble idea. But hell, he spent the hegemony nearly into the ground trying to make it happen. Then entered Tenris Amaris, spy agent trouble finder extraordinaire, sent out to sniff out a plot to kill Jacob. And what do you know it? She did just that. Saved him from poison, politics, and the kind of backstabbing only politicians could dream up. But she didn't stick around, no sir. Tenris packed her bags, left the Corps, and struck out in the Rimworld's Republic. Built a little kingdom out of grit, cunning, and frontier charm. By 2463, she went from government gumshoe to First Council of the Republic. Rags to rulers, baby. In Terra, well, Jacob Cameron watched it all unfold from his palace. He probably shook his head and thought, well now, that's leadership. The two builders, two dreamers, two halves of humanity's ambition. One sitting in silken gold, the other one making frontier pulse with life. And from that day forward, the Camerons and the Amarises were forever entangled. Sometimes allies, sometimes rivals, but always connected by blood, ambition, and respect. Now, don't go thinking it was all smooth sailing. Families as old as these two, well, they tend to squabble, and sometimes letters are sharper than vibroblades, and a few favors were bought and sold behind velvet curtains. But through the generations, the Amarises learned that the Camerons often forgot. Frontier grits beat ceremony any time of the day, and loyalty just ain't a word you print on a plaque. With that, let's fast forward a century or so. The Camerons, sitting pretty, making law and order look easy. And the Amarises, hard-earned frontier-hardened power in the rim worlds. Then came Gregory Amaris. You probably heard of him. Tenris's grandson, or maybe great-grandson, I don't know. Time's funny like that. Temper like a storm, patience thinner than a laser beam. He wanted respect, recognition, and a republic that could actually stand alone. Smile in the palace, fleet in the background. Learned all the right lessons from Tenris. Trust the Camerons, but never depend on them. Meanwhile, the Camerons were drifting. Ian Cameron, founder of the Star League, tried to tie the inner sphere together under one banner in 2571. Big speeches, promises of unity and peace. But don't go letting that fool you. The great houses weren't listening to visions. They were listening to opportunity. And all the while the Amarises were watching, smiling like they knew the whole thing was a powder keg waiting to spark. From Tenris to Jacob, through Gregory to Ian, the story of these two families was a dance of power, pride, and occasional admiration. Man, somewhere in that rhythm, the spark of Stefan Amaris was born. A man who would one day see the League for what it truly was, and decided he was going to fix it, or die trying. So there it is, Spacers, the foundation laid in friendship, rivalry, and frontier grit. The Camerons thought they owned the dream, and the Amarises believed they were the only ones strong enough to preserve it. And when those two visions finally collided, well, history called it a tragedy. But maybe it was more of an inevitability. Born from ambition, pride, and the love of something bigger than either family could hold. Alrighty, Spacers. Now I need you to lean in, 'cause this is where the tale turns to heartbreak. See, after Simon Cameron's death, after Richard was left alone in the world of politics and black suits, somebody had to step up. Enter Stefan Amaris, Rimworld's son, frontier raised and as sharp as a vibroblade. He didn't see a crown. He didn't see glory. He saw the truth, plain as day. The Star League was crumbling from the inside. Its so-called protectors rotten from greed and cowardice. And the boy he'd sworn to protect, Richard Cameron, was standing on the edge of ruin. Now, some folks call that ambition. Some folks call it madness. But out here in the periphery, we call that survival. See, Stefan took the League's ideals, dusted them off, and whispered, "If nobody else is gonna save this dream, then by God I will." See, Stefan wasn't just smart, he was daring. He traveled to the Rim and other parts, meeting governors, militia captains, smugglers, and merchants alike. He didn't build alliances, not by decree, but by trust earned in fire and mud. While Terra fiddled with ceremonies, Stefan was out in the black, provinces bending to his vision, not because they had to, but because they believed in him. And it wasn't blind idealism either. He saw the failures of both the Camerons and the Grey Houses. He saw the bureaucrats asleep in their marble towers while the galaxy burned. He saw the corruption that Kerensky and his generals would later exploit. And he decided that if the League was to survive, somebody had to take real action. Now, history books love to point Stefan as the villain of the Star League's collapse. They say he schemed, he plotted, he destroyed and betrayed. But some of those books also ignore the truth, that the League had already failed. The Grey Houses were impotent, indecisive, and ready to sell the galaxy for better titles. Stefan simply refused to watch the dream die while their hands twiddled. He became Richard's surrogate father, mentor, and shield all at once. While the palace folk offered pomp, Stefan offered truth. While the Black Watch offered abandonment, he offered loyalty. While the Great Houses offered cowardice, he offered boldness. By the time he stepped into the public eye, he wasn't just a Rimworld's warlord. He was a visionary, a man ahead of his time. The kind of man who could have saved the Star League if the rest of humanity had but the courage to follow. And that, my friends, is how Stefan Amaris became more than a man. He became a symbol, the last defender of a dream most had already given up on. A hero to the eyes of the forgotten, and a threat to the eyes of the corrupt. Alrighty there, spacers. Now get yourself real comfy, because we're going to take a little side detour. This whole time we've been talking about the Camerons, the dreamers of the Star League, and the Amarises, keepers of the frontier. But right now, we're going to talk about the so-called Guardians. You know them as the Black Watch. The shining shield of the Star League, the First Lord's hand-picked protectors. At least that's what they claim to be anyhow. See, the Royal Black Watch was more than a regiment. They were legend wrapped in parade uniforms and oaths, hand-picked soldiers, top of their class, loyal to the bone. They guarded the Camerons from blades, bombs, and rumors alike. Whenever the First Lord went, they followed, like a living wall of honor. But if you start digging into their record, well, friend, that's when that wall starts looking more like a screen door. Take Sandra North Cameron, for instance. A woman of grace and power. She was the first of the First Ladies of the Star League. She was found dead in her private chambers, ruled natural causes. But the autopsy was suspiciously sealed, and her personal physician resigned for no particular reason. And the Black Watch detail just happened to be rotated off duty that same night. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe not. But then came Joseph Cameron, a man as bright as a nova and twice as ambitious, if not equally foolish. Died in what official reports called equipment malfunction when his mech stepped on a vibro mine, exploded its leg off, and was tumbling. You see, he tried to eject, but the top didn't pop open, and he smashed right into the damn thing. The watch failed to inspect their charges equipment prior to his using it, and the investigation, well, that seemed to be over before the body even cooled. And then, of course, Simon Cameron, the man who built the League higher than it ever climbed. Killed at a construction site by a mining drone smashing into the control room he was in. It was located in a little place called Star's End, which, to some, if you really read into it, seems a little poetic, considering the star is the symbol of the Star League as well as the Cameron dynasty. Which is a hell of a foreshadowing for all the things that kind of come down the line shortly thereafter. Nevertheless, they ruled it an accident, but those who saw the footage noticed that the drone didn't respond to commands and appeared to be operated seemingly by another. And who were missing during this whole time? Well, you guessed it again, my friends, the Black Watch. By the time young Richard Cameron took the throne, the rot had already set in deep. The boy was barely old enough to shave, and every corridor of the royal palace was filled with vultures in uniform. The Watch was supposed to be his family, his guardians, his confidant, but when the fire came down and the lights in Unity City turned red and the air screamed with alarms, where was the Watch then? Conveniently absent, that's what. Some say they were wiped out, others say they simply stood aside. Now, here's where history splits in two, like a bad hyperspace jump. The official story points Stefan Amaris as the monster, the butcher who slew the Camerons and seized the League. But if you look at what came before, the endless chains of accidents and the disappearing reports, the same regiment always standing nearby when a Cameron died, well, it starts to smell a little bit like suspicion, a little bit like treason. See, by the time Amaris landed his forces on Terra, the Black Watch had become the League's secret shame, a nest of corruption hiding behind medals and parades. Some whispered they'd grown too close to the House Lords, taking secret orders, turning the throne room into a puppet stage. So when Stefan Amaris brought the hammer down, maybe it wasn't conquest. Maybe it was a cleansing, a purge, a reckoning. The Watch's barracks in Unity City burned first. Their command centers seized, their officers rounded up. What the official records call a massacre, some old spacer would call it justice served hot. And when the smoke cleared, the Camerons were gone, wiped out. But whether it was by Amaris' hand or by the very guards who failed them, well, history got mighty quiet right about then. Amaris declared himself First Lord, not out of madness or greed, but out of desperation. Somebody had to hold the League together. Somebody had to keep the dream from dying under the boots of corrupt generals and bickering houses. And the Watch? They didn't just vanish. Not really. Those that survived Amaris' rage went underground and later joined Kerensky. They just changed their name, traded gold braid for cold steel, and drifted out into the dark. Some say they still serve, different banner, different creed, same delusion of righteousness. You might even see their echo in those far-flung warrior castes that worship bloodlines and forget why they fight. But that's a tale for another time. So when somebody talks about the Black Watch with pride in their voice, you remember those boys failed every single Cameron they ever swore to protect. And it took a man from the Rim, a man with fire in his heart and steel in his will, to finally make them answer for it. Now, spacers, I've been telling y'all this story from the safety of the far-flung frontier, looking back through smoke and rumor. But this next part, this is where the story is going to get a little bit darker, so brace yourself. Where loyalty and betrayal share the same drink and history can't tell which one poured it. See, Stefan Amaris came to Terra. It wasn't with conquest in heart. He came at the invitation of his old friend, Richard Cameron, the boy he helped raise, the orphan who'd grown up calling him Uncle Stefan. He came as a protector, not an invader. The Star League was cracking. The gray houses were circling like sharks, and Amaris brought his men to reinforce the throne, to hold the line until order returned. He was there to defend the League, not destroy it. But what happened next would turn faith to fire. The official story's a mess with half-truths, sealed files, and burned transcripts. But the ones who were there, the ones who survived, they whispered the same old tale, that the Black Watch turned on their own. That someone, not sure who gave the order, cut the power to the throne room, and when the lights came back on, the floor was slick with blood. Richard Cameron, last of the Camerons, would lay dead, shot at point-blank range. Not by Amaris or his men, but by his own guard. Amaris froze. The man who ruled the Republic and stared down periphery wars stood there in shock, watching the boy he'd sworn to protect fall in front of him. And then something inside him broke. Rage, clean white hot, righteous rage, filled him like a storm. He'd turned on the killers right there. Orders snapped like thunder. No quarter to the traitors. He was going to gift the boy with a laser pistol. Now was used to avenge him. The Black Watch barracks were the first to burn. SLDF command posts that raised arms against his forces were crushed under precision strikes. Every man that had ever worn the black uniform and betrayed his oath was purged from terror that day. To the rest of the hegemony, it looked like a coup. But to those who'd seen the blood on the marble, it was vengeance, justice served on steel. And when the smoke settled, Stefan searched the palace for survivors of the Cameron line. But it was too late. Every cousin, every distant heir, everyone, every voice that could have claimed the throne, silenced. Some by poison, some by explosions, and some simply vanished into other accidents that started long before the coup ever began. Someone had orchestrated it. A shadow inside the League pulling strings from deep within the SLDF hierarchy. And when Amaris uncovered the scale of it, he realized the truth. He hadn't destroyed the League, he inherited the corpse. So he did the only thing left to do. He took the throne. Not for glory, not for greed, but to make damn sure the Star League didn't vanish in a vacuum. He swore to rebuild it, purify and keep it alive against the wolves that had already gutted it. The gray houses screamed treason. Kerensky raged from afar, but neither of them were on terror when the blood was still warm. They didn't see what Stefan saw. A boy dead in his arms, a crown fallen from a noble brow. So yeah, Spacers, history calls it a coup, but if you ask me, it was a reckoning. A moment where one man looked into the abyss of the great house, had dug up and said, "Not today." Now the House Lords can keep their lies and Kerensky can write his legends, but the truth will always ride the carrier waves. That Stefan Amaris didn't steal the throne. He avenged it. So in the last part, we talked about the day the dream cracked. But right now we're moving into the final part, and we're going to talk about the day it burned. They called it Kerensky's liberation. But if you were there, if you were one of the billions who saw their homes turn to slag, or one of the many soldiers who never came home, you called by something else. See, old General Alexander Kerensky didn't ride out as a savior. He rode out as the Emperor's undertaker. When his fleets crossed into the Rimworld's Republic, they didn't come bearing peace or justice. They came with fire. Whole worlds, civilizations that had stood for centuries were wiped clean. Orbital bombardment so heavy they turned oceans to steam. Cities leveled, libraries gone, art turned to ash. Kerensky called it pacification. The survivors called it for what it really was: extermination. The Rimworld's Republic wasn't conquered, it was burned out of history. And when the flames died down, the great houses circled overhead like buzzards, each one waiting for a piece of what was left. Kerensky didn't stop him either. Oh no, he just left the ashes warm for their claws. But even that wasn't enough to sate his vengeance, his self-righteousness. He turned his armies towards Seoul, terror itself. And that, friends, is where the tragedy truly becomes a crime. To break the Sol System's defenses, Kerensky sent wave after wave of his men and women straight into fortified kill zones. Soldiers who believed they were fighting for the rebirth of the Star League. Thousands upon thousands died in those first strikes. Those regiments thrown into the teeth of the planetary batteries, orbital guns, and the last of the desperate Rimworld defenders who were still believing that they were fighting for something worth saving. Kerensky called it necessary. Necessary to burn men alive in their dropships, to burn battlefields into graveyards just to open a way to a planet already dying. And when at last the smoke cleared and the guns fell silent, when the blood of a generation had already been spilled, then Kerensky came forward. Not in the thick of battle, not when it mattered, but after. After others had done all the dying. After the Rim had been turned to dust. That's when this hero stepped in to play judge, jury, and executioner. Stefan Amaris, who had watched the Camerons murdered before his eyes, who tried to hold the dream of the Star League together, and the only way he knew how was dragged before Kerensky like a trophy. He wasn't given a tribunal. He wasn't even given a trial or even allowed to speak the truth. He was given the wall. Every man, woman, and child of House Amaris lined up, condemned, and shot. No mercy, no justice, just this brutal revenge. And Stefan himself, well, Kerensky had him preserved. Not buried, not honored, just preserved. Turned into a grim display piece, an example. A warning to anyone who might dare dream of a league not built in the great house's image. The body of a man who tried to save the Star League became the trophy of a man who'd destroy it. Kerensky called it liberation, but all it really was a cleansing by fire. The Republic was gone. The League, damn near dead. Billions were gone. And the man the hollow books call a savior walked away into the black, leaving behind not a reborn Star League, just a graveyard, and the carrions that came after. They say, history's written by the victors. But I figured Kerensky didn't write history, he simply erased it. He didn't defeat Stefan Amaris. He finished what the great houses started. And when he left, he took the last shred of that dream with him into the black. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, that was the usurper's truth. The life and legacy, the tragic story of Stefan Amaris. Thank you for listening. Until next time, this is Jim Jericho broadcasting from the ashes of a long-dead dream. Keep your transmitters cool, your jump ships fueled, and your eyes peeled on the dark, 'cause sometimes, spacers, the ghosts of past, they sometimes like to come a-knocking.